Airframe icing. In certain situations, it can render an aircraft virtually unflyable in a matter of minutes, while cutting off any avenues of escape for its pilot. In this real pilot story, we hear from a Cessna 182 pilot who survived an encounter with severe icing, and look at the lessons his story holds for other cold weather flyers.
My name is Dean Clark. I have aviation ever since 1963 when I joined the Air Force.
After leaving the Air Force, Clark earned a private pilot certificate and eventually went on to serve as an air traffic controller at Chicago Center.
On this particular evening in January of 2006, I had called flight service for a weather brief to find out how my flight was going to be, and they just said other than colder temperatures and snow flurries, there shouldn't have been a problem. There was no problem at all.
Clark departed Tomahawk at 5:30 the next morning. On the ground, the temperature was minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Proceeding southbound at 9,000 feet, everything seemed normal. With roughly two-thirds of the trip behind him, he was handed off to a Madison, Wisconsin approach controller, who asked about his flight conditions.
Shined my flashlight out, and I said, I'm in some snow flurries, which I was briefed that was going to happen. And she at that time said she was painting some weather at 12 o'clock and I don't know how many miles. And I said, the only thing I think it could be would be snow flurries or snow.
Proceeding on that assumption, Clark continued toward the weather, but he was in for a surprise. Entering the area the controller had pointed out, the aircraft suddenly began taking on large quantities of clear ice.
And it was fast. I mean, it just loaded the airplane up, and I knocked the autopilot off. I got the carb heat on and started throwing as much heat on the windshield as I could. Manifold pressure started coming down a little bit, and I got that back. However, my airspeed was just, I'm down to 90 mile an hour, 80 mile an hour.
Clark informed the controller of the situation, but did not declare an emergency.
I asked for lower because I told her I didn't think I was going to be able to hold the altitude, which I wasn't. So I started counting. She cleared me to 5,000 feet. She asked me what I wanted to do, and I says, well, I really don't want to go back that way and get into more clear ice because I was pretty well loaded up. See the leading edge of the wings and the struts off the side. There was a lot of ice on this airplane. The best way I could describe it was like going from flying a Cessna 150 to maybe like flying a stationary 206 or something like that. The controls were a lot heavier than the lighter airplane.
Continuing on through the pre-dawn darkness in a slow but constant descent, Clark weighed his options. Two sizable airports, Janesville, Wisconsin, and Rockford, Illinois, lay ahead. But not knowing how long he could keep the airplane flying, he opted to avoid such populated areas in favor of staying over the open farmland below him. If he couldn't make his destination of Aurora, Illinois, he'd do his best to keep the airplane under control and hope to land in one of the snow-covered fields.
I really felt that as slow and low as I was going at the time, I don't think it would have been that dangerous unless I hit an object. Then there would have been a problem. So I decided to continue on.
The fact that his approach charts for Janesville and Rockford were in the back seat also played a role in the decision, as he was reluctant to reach for them and risk losing control of the aircraft.
I knew my first objection was, no matter what the situation was, to fly the airplane. Because if you can't fly the airplane, you're not going to fare too well. So I talked to the Rockford approach controller, and I told him that I had a lot of ice on me. I never declared an emergency. For what reason, I don't know. All the heat I could throw in the airplane was on the windshield. There was probably 1.5 inches to 2 inches of clear ice on the windshield. There was no visibility out the front whatsoever. The only visibility I had was out the side, and I'm certainly not going to yaw the airplane the outside better in front of me because that would have been disastrous. I asked the approach controller to get me to the localizer at Aurora the quickest way possible. But he kept on telling me that I was below the minimum vectoring altitude out there. And I told him, I said, well, I can't hold altitude and just keep coming down. That's why I asked for a real early turn on.
Making the gentlest turns possible, Clark intercepted the localizer for runway 9 at Aurora. He was roughly 500 feet below the glide slope at that point.
I had it locked quite well. I mean, I had the localizer. I was coming down the localizer like I was supposed to, and but I couldn't see the rabbit. So I had to move over a little bit, and I finally saw the light, so I knew I was in the right place. Snowing, it's snowing very, very hard at the time. But I was able to fly to localizer. I wasn't getting below it at that time because I was coming down, and the airplane was already in a landing attitude with probably nose high with all the weight on the airplane, and there was no going around. There was definitely none of that. There was 3 to 4 inches of fresh snow on the runway. I didn't even know I was actually on the ground until the nose wheel came down.
Unable to see the aircraft through the snow, the tower anxiously inquired whether Clark was down. Later, they asked to have a look at the ice-covered Cessna.
The ice was so heavy, there were stalactites on the rivet rows underneath the wing. I've never seen anything like that before. I had to break them off with a door to try and get out of the airplane. And I really didn't realize how bad it was until I got out and saw the airplane, which time I took some pictures because I know some of my pilot friends would never believe it if I told them. That's probably when I got nervous about the whole situation. You know, I'd worked a long time in air traffic, over 20 years, and I've seen a lot of things happen, and I've seen a lot of tragedies happen because of the same situation.
Where are the cloud tops and bottoms? Where's the freezing level? What's the MEA? What kind of terrain is below me? If I have trouble, what's my escape route? These are all questions that deserve consideration prior to flight. We can predict high-risk areas for icing, but it's not always easy to tell exactly where it will occur. Sometimes all the necessary elements seem to be in place, but nothing happens. And sometimes ice seems unlikely right up until it starts to form. In this case, the pilot assumed it was too cold for anything but solid precip, and usually he would have been right, but not this time. Any run-in with ice has the potential to get very serious very quickly. It can be hard to judge how fast ice is accumulating, and in freezing rain or encounters with supercooled large droplets, you may have only minutes to escape. Bottom line, in a non-de-iced aircraft, treat any encounter with ice as an emergency requiring immediate action, and leave ATC no doubt about the severity of the problem. You may not have approach charts for a nearby airport, but don't rule out landing there on that basis. ATC can provide all the information you need to fly an approach without charts. Around ice, the autopilot can get you in trouble. You may not realize what's happening as the aircraft loads up with ice and trims itself to maintain programmed flight parameters. Best to turn it off when entering potential icing conditions. Also, if you've picked up ice, lowering the flaps can lead to a tail stall. Leave them up for landing and be prepared to use more runway than normal. Non-turbocharged piston airplanes are not ideal for year-round IFR in ice country. And even with anti-icing systems, they sometimes lack the performance for true all-weather operation. If you're flying a non-de-iced aircraft, be conservative in your planning and vigilant in the air. And if you have ice protection, remember that it's no guarantee even for turbine aircraft. Every year, airframe ice brings down roughly a quarter of all the GA airplanes lost to weather. Dean Clark was lucky not to have been one of them. This winter, don't put yourself in the position of having to be equally lucky.
Do have a heavy to extreme cell at your 1 to 2 o'clock.
The reports the pilot of the plane may have been doing aerial acrobatics just before.
By no stretch of the imagination are we healed, and we may never be healed.
When a strange sight appears in the gray, overcast sky, Drivers who happen to look up are stunned to see an aircraft spiraling toward the ground in a near vertical dive, trailing smoke. Within seconds, the doomed aircraft plunges into the southbound lanes and wooded median of I-287. Several motorists have no choice but to drive through the fireball. Miraculously, none of them are injured. Their narrow escape is the one bright spot in an otherwise grim situation. All 5 people aboard the aircraft, 2 of them young children, are dead.
Brian, look, looks like we're losing more airspeed.